Here in Columbus City Council chambers tonight for the fourth public hearing regarding the Zone In Phase 1 legislation that's currently pending before City Council. As always, I want to thank members of the public for being here in person with us tonight, also those that may be tuning in virtually. I do want to recognize that, as many folks are aware, the city has been affected by some ongoing technical outages with our email systems and others. Folks in our Department of Technology have been working around the clock to try and get those systems back up, but it does limit the ability for council to receive external emails and for us to respond to those emails. Most council members at this point have created a separate email address that is accessible. So I want to make sure that folks have mine, which is cppt.robdorns at gmail.com. If you are interested in contacting an additional council member, please look at their Facebook or Instagram pages in order to access those email addresses. I know many folks are waiting for responses, particularly to this topic from my office, and we're working to try and get some of those responses out now that we're set up with that external email address. I do want to let folks know that, again, because of that outage, our speaker system that we typically use for these kinds of hearings has some challenges. So folks that have signed up already, we have you. But if you're interested in filling out a speaker slip to testify here this evening, please see Kevin McCain. Kevin, if you want to raise your hand for folks. If you're interested in speaking here tonight, please notify Mr. McCain, and he can provide you with a speaker slip so that you are afforded the opportunity to speak before council. Again, I want to thank our zone-in team that is here tonight, many representatives of the administration that has been working tirelessly with council and folks in the community on this proposal. I want to, again, provide my special thanks to Assistant Director for Growth Policy, Kevin Wheeler, Department Building and Zoning Services Director, Scott Messer. We've got, I think, I'm going to try not to name everyone because I'm going to leave somebody out, but again, we'll probably get to most of the folks at some point as we respond to public comment here tonight. Also want to thank my council colleagues that are here with me tonight. Council President Hardin, who's joined us, who's been a tireless advocate on this issue for years. Also want to hand out the gold star of perfect attendance to Councilmember Nancy Diakower, who's been at literally every single one of these hearings. So thank you, Councilmember, for being here at all of these. And certainly Councilmember Brosta de Padilla. And well, we're just handing out stars up here. They're pretty free tonight. So so thank you, Councilmember Brosta de Padilla and Councilmember Weich for being here with us tonight. Also want to thank our CTV staff, again, with the ongoing tech issues, getting this up on the internet, live streaming on YouTube is not the simplest thing, so I want to certainly thank them and Mark Carter from our council team for making that happen. This is the fourth public hearing that we've had on this topic, the Zone-In initiative that was initially proposed to members of the public back in early April of this year. When we had that initial legislation come before council, we set forth a requirement within our code to have at minimum 2 public hearings. We in fact even had a public hearing on that, enabling legislation to authorize the public hearings. So we are at 4 public hearings specific to this legislation and that additional public hearing before. Our first public hearing was held at Douglas Community Center back in May, which was an overview of the proposed code and map put forth by the administration. Second public hearing was held at the Scioto Southland Community Center, focused on housing and parking. The third public hearing back in June focused on the community feedback that we heard during the 60-day public comment period. And tonight, we'll hear from our zoning team regarding an overview of the final legislation for Phase 1, including the changes that were made to the original proposal that council will have on our agenda on this Monday, July 29th. As a reminder, as I said, for folks that are here, if you are still interested in speaking, please alert Mr. McCain, and he will provide you with a speaker slip and make sure that you have an opportunity to be called before the body. Before I turn it over to our zone-in team, I did want to pause to see any of my colleagues have anything they'd like to say before we get going. Great. With that, I would love to turn the floor over to the Director of Building and Zoning Services, Scott Messer, for some remarks before we get going. Director?
Good evening, President Hardin, President Pro Tem Dorns, and other members of council. Thanks for the opportunity to comment here this evening. We do have a large team here, and I want to start by saying that I'm really pleased at the stage where we are in the Zone-In initiative, and I really appreciate all the support, especially from you council members and all of your staff, as well as the team that's here, especially folks from the Department of Development and some of my team from Building and Zoning Services. We've worked on this project since the beginning, and It's been quite a heavy lift. We truly wouldn't be here without all the collaboration of you and your teams, as well as administrative folks here that are with me. But also, we wouldn't be where we are without the involvement of the community up to this point. The collaboration not only with city staff and city engagement, but also with the community and stakeholders has been invaluable. Obviously, we're going to talk tonight about a lot of the comments that we got from the 60-day formal comment period, but I just wanted to highlight that we've been engaging with the community since the beginning of this Zone In initiative. We've had thousands and thousands of people who have commented, from 14 years old to 84. We had over 5,000 written comments, over 100 presentations that my team participated in to various community area commissions and community groups. We had 15 different community large events, 2,600 folks subscribed to our emails, 6,600 surveys, over 31 zip codes were represented in the feedback. We've also sent out over 78,000 postcards to affected property owners and folks related to the change in actual zoning. And we had over 27,000 unique visitors to our website that we posted. So I just wanted to highlight that tonight is kind of the last public hearing and is a culmination of a lot of public engagement and a lot of public process that led us to where we are. It's important that we understand that this is the first phase. We're far from being finished. This zoning is obviously focused on specific corridors, as we know, in the city. The plan is to monitor these changes that we're making. We will be willing to adjust if necessary and learn from these changes, and this phase one will certainly help inform us as we move forward with future changes to update the zoning code, which we're excited about. We have several staff here to answer questions, and as you mentioned, Kevin Wheeler has a presentation that he's going to work through talking about the formal comment period and some of the proposed changes. But before I turn it over to Kevin, I'd be happy to answer any questions or comments. Otherwise, we'll move forward with Kevin's presentation.
Yep. Any questions, council members, to the director? Thank you, Director. I also just want to say, this is, I think, the largest public engagement campaign the city has had, I think, on literally any topic. We're talking about being here at this public hearing, having 78,000 postcards that went out to property owners that are in phase one, adjacent property owners, the thousands of people that have engaged, whether or not it's through the website or other ways, the hundreds of people that have contacted council. I think by the end tonight, we'll probably have well over 100 folks that have testified in person on this topic. There's no perfect public engagement strategy. There's no perfect way to make sure every single person in our community knows exactly what's being debated here about this proposal. But I think we've done as much as we possibly can from a council and administration standpoint to be as transparent about what's been proposed here and trying to make sure that if folks want to engage on this topic, they've had the opportunity to. And I just want to say thanks to my council colleagues who, again, on a Wednesday night are here yet again to talk about this topic yet again, and folks in the administration that have given lots of their time to make sure that they are walking residents through about what this proposal does and what it doesn't do. So I think we've had some folks that have mentioned they would like to see more, and my thing is more when we talk about making sure folks know what's going on here. But I think we've tried to do as much as we possibly can from a council administration standpoint to allow folks to engage on this meaningfully. So with that, I'd love to turn the mic over to Assistant Director for Growth Policy, Kevin Wheeler, to walk us through his presentation about where we're at with the legislation at this point.
Thank you, Council President Pro Tem Dorans, President Hardin, and other members of council. If you're in the audience, a copy of this presentation, as well as several other handouts, are back there to the right as you enter, so feel free to grab that. So this is the first phase of Zone In. Zone In ultimately is a goal to replace the current zoning code and map, update the current zoning code and map. But we're starting with phase one, and we're focusing on key corridors because of the opportunity that they represent to provide housing, support transit, and address a lot of the other needs that we have as a community, taking advantage of the opportunities that growth can bring. The timeline just reminds us that we started really in a sort of a public way in the fall of 2022 with an Undesigned the Red Line series. And as you look through this timeline, there's been a series of activities. We actually had two mailings. We did a mailing in the fall of 23 to property owners as well as renters or tenants along and adjacent to the corridor, and then we did it again to property owners here earlier this spring ahead of the review period. Some of you had a chance to visit the gallery, and that gallery, I think we ended up having about 1,600 people visit it. You know, the engagement that we did throughout this process led to a series of priorities, and they really focused on the need that our community has for housing and the rising cost of housing, and how that is increasingly a barrier for folks who cannot find affordable places to live. The fact that we need to support our Main Street businesses. The fact that there is really in the current code and the barriers and obstacles that it represents a need to move towards a more equitable strategy. You know, that these corridors are uniquely positioned to help create better connected communities, that we as a city, as a region, need better transit, we need more walkability, we need more cycling options, but particularly public transit. And transit and land use go hand in hand. And then finally, good urban design, something that our current code does not include. It does not include design guidelines or design standards in the way that the new code will. The priorities led to strategies. We talked about these strategies in the fall at a series of workshops. And I'm not going to read this slide. There's a lot of words on it. In fact, there's a lot of words on the whole presentation. I apologize for that. But again, we wanted you to have it as a printout so you didn't have to necessarily hear it all as I present it. But these strategies, again, were, you know, okay, so how do you actually increase housing supply? How do you use zoning as a tool to support businesses, support transit, et cetera? Those strategies ultimately led to an April proposal. That proposal was provided to City Council on April 4th, and then on April 8th, Council passed a resolution to proceed with the public review process, and that's what many folks here tonight are familiar with. That public review process, 60 days, we did a variety of things to get the word out to folks, and you know, the good news, I think, is that we heard from a lot of people in that process and were able to interact with folks as they read the code and shared their thoughts about it. And then that comment period and the comments that we received during that period led to an updated proposal. One of the pieces of one of the handouts you have tonight is a summary of the different legislation associated with this proposal and what each piece does. There is a parking impact study guide, and we also have a document summarizing the changes to the proposal since April. The responses and revisions that we're going to talk about tonight follow this list. We're going to basically follow the list that we used in the last public hearing to talk about what we heard from the community, and then what are our responses and revisions stemming from that. We'll start with community feedback. Concern expressed that the proposed changes would eliminate communities' opportunity, particularly through area commissions, to review and provide input on development proposals, and concerns that without that, development would lead to negative impacts. Responses, the existing code requires exceptions to really get a good result. The existing code doesn't work in a way that typically any of the community priorities and objectives expressed through plans and so on can be realized. The new code aims to do a better job of getting that right from the start, reflecting the lessons that we've learned, because 96% of council actions on zoning are about a site-specific condition because the current code is broken. Zoning implements community priorities of C2P2, neighborhood plans, including design guidelines, focus on the corridors. Area commissions will continue to review variances and rezonings. That does not change. The new code applies design standards that are lacking in the current code. The site compliance process. This is something that happens when a new project is proposed, or is going to continue. And the site compliance process involves site access, traffic, infrastructure, and related issues. And then, the city has launched something, it's pretty, I think is super cool. It's a development tracker. And this is something that you can sign up for. You can determine a geography that you're interested in, be alerted of building permit applications, rezoning applications, site clearance or site review applications, and so on. And this is something that is now available for folks to follow along and see what's going on in their community. Historic preservation and design review, we heard concerns expressed about the potential impacts on locally designated districts in design review areas, as well as the work of the commissions themselves, and then finally impacts on areas that are not designated. We added language, very specific language, clarifying that the existing protections in these areas remain in place for locally designated historic districts and sites. Design review will continue to apply also in East Franklinton and University District. They're not historic districts, but they have design review. And we specifically state in the code updates that building scale and design, including things like height, are subject to adopted design guidelines. Historic and design review areas are also exempted from the design-oriented standards of the new code. Variances to existing code are often required for historic properties and communities. In fact, very little of the historic fabric of our city could be rebuilt with the existing zoning code. It is out of alignment. The new parking strategy, which I'll mention later, and a wider use allowance actually supports adaptive reuse of buildings, older buildings. Again, zoning will apply design standards in areas that don't currently have it, and I think ultimately one of the things that we have come to realize is that zoning is not the best tool in areas that are not designated. Zoning is not the best tool to address historic preservation. Parking. Concerns expressed about eliminating parking requirements and what that might do in terms of impact on the community. There's also support for expressed for eliminating parking requirements as a barrier to affordable housing and to support transit and walkable communities. The zone-in proposal prioritizes people over cars. It prioritizes walkability and transit, something that we hear over and over again our communities want. We know that excessive parking standards work against these goals. Parking is the most common variance topic. It adds costs and time delays to even simple projects. And one of the consequences of that are higher costs of housing, parking lots that go 50% or more unused, wasted resources in our community. The experience of peer cities, and by now many of the folks here will realize that we are proposing the elimination of specific parking minimums. We are not prohibiting parking, as some people have suggested. The experience of our peer cities, many peer cities, and in our own downtown for 27 years shows that most developers, businesses provide the parking needed. They want their projects to succeed, and their lenders often require it. We have, with the updated proposal, an ordinance, a companion ordinance 2215 that enacts Chapter 4310 within the city codes, which is a parking impact study code. The parking impact study code, and there's a one-pager that talks about that, as well as the guide, a guide in the back, establishes or requires the establishment of rules and regulations. The study will be triggered based on parking thresholds. There are exemptions for smaller projects, that's 10 units for residential and 2,500 square feet for non-residential, as well as low-income housing projects that use state tax credits specifically. So these are entirely low income. The analysis that gets triggered by the parking study looks at the current conditions, looks at the proposal to determine what potential impacts are in the surrounding area, and then determines if mitigation measures are needed. That may include shared parking arrangements, transit and rideshare passes, as well as bike and car share programs. Mitigation may also ultimately require establishment of residential parking permit system to preserve access for nearby residents. Sustainability. We heard from a number of people who expressed a desire to see a more sustainable code solution. We also received a lot of support for this proposal because of the increased density, both saving land, farmland, as well as supporting transit and ultimately reducing carbon emission. We heard from people who wanted to see if there were ways that we could introduce more green space and trees with this first proposal. The responses, again, I think our position, broadly speaking, is that this first phase is critical for sustainability in our community, that focused development reduces sprawl, the loss of farmland and wooded areas. It supports walkability, transit, and reduces carbon emissions. We focused on the main corridors with this higher density rather than the neighborhoods because of what we believe it can accomplish in that way. Most of the parcels included in this rezoning are already developed, including a lot of parcels that are large, underutilized parking lots and retail facilities that could be redeveloped, ultimately with more green space. Multi-story buildings create less impervious surface, require less energy to heat and cool than the equivalent number of detached single family. And the first phase will trigger open space and green space planning requirements in a number of situations where they currently aren't in place. Continued, language has been added requiring landscaping of larger setbacks and the establishment of planted buffers between certain zones. We are applying the EV charging requirements in the current code to these new districts, that's electric vehicle charging. Two of the districts, Community Activity Center and Regional Activity Center, make up about 70% of the total acreage. Those require unit trees, and we've added a requirement that those trees be native species trees. Proposed large site standards. This is, if you can imagine, a site, maybe it's a former shopping center. This is a Grandview Yard, a Grandview Crossing, Jeffrey Park kind of development. Any new streets, private or public, will require street trees. And one of the things I want to mention, because we heard about stormwater, is that the city stormwater management requirements will continue. Housing feedback. Support expressed for the proposal's support of housing, concern that maybe it doesn't go far enough, requests that the affordability requirements be more extensive, and just the observation that sometimes new development isn't affordable. I think one of the things that we've learned is just that increased supply is critical in lessening demand and pressure on existing housing stock. Increased supply at all levels. Zone-in creates opportunities for additional housing throughout the city, including areas that have great transit, great parks, great opportunities for folks. We think that's critical. The Ohio Revised Code prohibits the city from requiring affordability. It does allow us to provide incentives for affordability, and that's why we focused on a height bonus to encourage the use of affordability, our community reinvestment area program. We revisit that every 3 years. If you want the height bonus, you have to commit to the CRA program. You don't have to build the additional height. And many projects do not take advantage of the CRA program, but that's an option for folks. One of the things that we think is important is that this new proposal will allow for a broader range of housing types. One of the things that we looked at was smaller lots in the older city. How can we make those more viable for missing middle housing, middle range of housing? This new code, we believe, allows for that. It also allows for single-family homes, many of which today are non-conforming, as well as accessory dwelling units to be built by right. Zone-in makes it more feasible to build smaller projects by removing use and parking barriers in particular. Those are two areas that have been a hurdle for many, many projects. We recognize that it's just one piece of the puzzle on housing. It's going to take a lot of tools, a lot of partnerships to get where we need to be as a region. Feedback on building height and scale. Support expressed for taller buildings and more density along corridors, but then we also had concern about the same things, particularly near residential. Concerns expressed that proposed setbacks are too small and that new development often lacks character. One of the things that we looked at, we have several dozen adopted area plans in the Columbus Community Planning Policies, C2P2, that encourage greater density along our primary corridors, especially near existing and planned transit. We believe that taller buildings, more capacity is critical in addressing our housing crisis, and we've tried to focus highest densities in areas that are supported by transit near activity centers in ways that we feel take advantage of some of those, that natural connection. The design standards that have been incorporated, including step backs at the rear, once you go above a certain height, requirement that buildings be built to face the street, be built in a way that really encourages pedestrian scale and walkability, we believe helps to mitigate the impact of taller buildings on adjacent buildings. And the good news, I think, as a city is that we have a lot of examples of how this can be done. Continued response. Setbacks from alleys have been established in urban general, community activity center, and regional activity center. And we've also increased side yard setbacks in the community activity center and regional activity center, and we are requiring landscape buffers in some conditions between districts and residential. Infrastructure and development impacts. We heard concerns that additional development would overtax existing infrastructure, causing negative impacts on surrounding neighborhoods. People raised things like traffic, water and sewer capacity, stormwater, et cetera. And particularly traffic, I think, is a concern folks expressed. And that, additional development won't have the kinds of services it needs. New people won't have the services they need, like grocery stores and so on. The growth is happening. It's not an option. It's happening. I think the question is how we manage it. We believe that this approach allows us to focus growth in places that are best suited for it. It leverages existing infrastructure. It allows us to build and react with capital improvements over time, because even though the growth pressure is significant, it's not like it happens all at once. We have opportunities to focus as we will. We know that focused mixed-use development generates fewer trips than typical development built at the urban edge. New development must go through extensive site review. I mentioned this earlier, including utility capacity, traffic impact, stormwater, and similar elements. That's regardless of zoning. We also know that retail follows rooftops. As new development emerges on these corridors, they will become more attractive for retail uses, such as grocery stores, adding amenities to neighborhoods that otherwise lack them. And as a city, we already are shifting focus in terms of capital investment, recognizing that much of our growth will be up as opposed to out. Map changes. We had several requests to add additional areas to phase one. We also had requests from a number of folks and organizations to drop Livingston Avenue in German Village from the proposal. Additionally, we had requests in different areas to increase or decrease the density along a particular section of the corridor. The majority of the map comments overall were supportive of the proposed district placement or wanted to see an increase. We talked about that last month. I believe that presentation is on our website as well as the city's YouTube channel if you want to see that. Beyond minor technical edits, no changes to the map are being proposed in this update. Staff analysis confirmed the existing proposal, which is based on area plan recommendations, existing zoning, existing overlays, site characteristics, and community engagement throughout the zoning process. Consistent with the advice of the city attorney, no new areas were added to the map. Technical edits include the correction of a single parcel that had an error, a designation in error from urban core down to urban center, and map cleanup. We had a few parcels that weren't actually parcels, didn't have a parcel number, it was more like a right-of-way. So those are the only changes. As we move forward, additional districts will be created, including ones that allow for more flexible site arrangement, smaller scale commercial, neighborhoods, and so on. Those are part of future phases. Getting down to the end. Additional topics, provisions for accessibility. I think one of the things that we've heard in the last couple hearings is concern that accessibility is a challenge for a lot of folks here, finding accessible housing. We looked at, what does the zoning code do in order to encourage that? I think two fundamental things about this proposal is that it allows ground floor residential throughout the corridors. Right now, 80% of these corridors do not permit ground floor residential. That's obviously the first place to look at in terms of accessibility. It's also the case that as buildings get taller, they require elevators, another fundamental element of accessibility. Many of the other mobility considerations are focused, rather than zoning, are focused on the building code. Articles C and D, we have had questions, what's up with C and D? They're reserved, they're blank. These are, C addresses administration, boards, and D addresses boards and commissions. These are reserved for later stages of the zone-in initiative. We are going to continue to rely on the existing zoning code, Title 33, to address these issues. This is not something that we will do without lots of conversation and go through a similar process, but we are not ready to address those. We're continuing to use the existing zoning code to cover those topics. And then, I think this is my final slide, amendments to existing Title 33. So we've said that we're going to, over time, replace the current code and the current map. The existing code is Title 33. And we will continue to rely on many elements of it to implement the new code. So in the meantime, they have to work together. So we have updated administrative sections like rezoning, variances, enforcement, and so on in the existing code so that they are applicable to the new code. To the extent that people provide parking, and we think that they will in many, many cases, those parking spots, the aisle width, the space size, and so on, needs to comply with the requirements of the existing zoning code, Title 33, Chapter 3312 specifically. Commercial overlays, urban, community, regional commercial overlays. Those sections of Title 33 have been updated to exclude the new districts because the new districts include the kinds of requirements that overlays institute. We will now just have one zoning district, not a base and an overlay, because we're doing the things the overlays accomplish. And then finally, an additional highlight is changes to the East Franklinton and University District areas where we have design review in place to make sure that that continues to apply to the new mixed-use districts. That concludes the presentation.
Thank
Council
you.
President Pro Tem Dorans.
Thank you, Assistant Director. Any questions from council members for the Assistant Director this time? So just a couple clarifying questions, just to make sure everyone's on the same page, because again, a point of that we've heard a lot from folks is that, by having this plan come through, that sort of removes the area commission from this process, where traditionally right now, if someone needs a variance or a rezoning, that's where folks go first. Our city code adopts our area commissions as the official advisory body to city council for rezonings or for variances. So folks have expressed concern around this. How I have tried to talk through this with folks is that there are currently things that come through that process right now that don't go before an area commission because they don't need a rezoning, they don't need a variance. The idea here is essentially, again, to be proactive in the sense of updating outdated zoning to be more reflective of today's current development conditions into the future, which again should put everyone on the same page at the front end versus this project by project sort of negotiation. So, one area that I think has sort of stood out in this is there are areas of, say, the south side of Columbus that are zoned manufacturing right now, but there has not been manufacturing there in some time, and there's been a lot of housing development, even though it makes perfect sense for housing to be there. Folks would have to go through that process in order to have something rezoned come before council. A situation like this in which we're proactively updating the zoning to be more reflective of what we think is more appropriate there, they would not need to go before the area commission because that's essentially what we're accomplishing right now by saying we need to update this land use right now into the future. Is that sort of a fair way of putting it?
It is, Council President Pro Tem Dorans, it is. I will say again, though, that if there is a condition that's not met and a variance is needed and sought, that will receive review from the Area Commission.
So for example, if someone proposed a development that fit the zoning but did not fit the design standards that we put forth, they wanted to do something different. So they would, one, need to come get a variance from City Council, but by the very fact of them needing a variance, that would trigger the traditional process that exists right now in which they go before the Area Commission, correct?
That is correct. No changes have been made to any of those elements of Title 31, which sets out area commissions.
And again, one of the whole points of that is right now so many of our area commissions are having to review projects on a day-to-day basis that make a lot of sense to everyone. I think council has like a 98% alignment with area commissions from the recommendations, but what we really want to get to is a point in which we're getting into substantial community feedback when someone's asking for a real exception or real deviation from what we think the plan should actually have.
Yeah, that's correct. And I think one of the things, Director Messer said it, I mean, we're going to monitor the code, see how it works, and adjust as we need to. But this new code has fairly high expectations for building design and placement, and deviation from that will require a variance.
Good. Thank you. Any other questions? Councilmember Diacaro?
Yes, about the parking impact study and the mitigation measures. I just want a clarifying question because this is something that has come up a lot, is if parking permits end up being the mitigation chosen, how is that going to impact current residents in that neighborhood versus people who would be moving into the new development?
I am going to defer to Justin Goodwin, who is the Administrator of Mobility and Parking Options.
Thank you, Mr. Wheeler, and Councilmember Diacaro. So the proposed guidelines that would be enabled, in fact, rules and regulations enabled by new Chapter 4310 are really modeled off of guidelines that we have in place today for reviewing parking variance requests. So we have a model that we've already been employing for a number of years now. Our general policy when we review a request for a multifamily development that may have an impact on parking, on-street parking in surrounding neighborhoods. If a permit parking zone is required to be created where there isn't one today, that new development, the residents of that new development are generally not eligible to receive those permits. There are some exceptions to that, primarily in the Short North area, projects that were already underway as the special parking area was established a number of years ago. But really the intent of establishing a permit parking zone is to preserve access for the surrounding neighborhood streets, and that would be the intent if identified as a necessary mitigation through this process as well.
Okay, so the existing residents get the parking permits, not the new people moving in, correct?
Correct, and in fact, the rules and regulations include the potential to require a fee of the applicant, the development applicant, to cover the cost to establish a permit program. That would cover signage, parking enforcement, administrative costs, as well as for a period of time, the direct cost to residents. A residential permit is a $25 annual fee. So that would cover for a period of years the direct cost to residents.
Thank you. Any other questions from council members? Great. So we're going to turn to public comment at this point, but I do want to echo something that the assistant director mentioned, is that we've talked a lot about this code not having been comprehensively updated in 70 years. There has been small changes along the way that have sort of built on one another, and many of those small changes have made unintended consequences that people have then had to go back and make changes then as well. I think one of the things that I've committed to many folks have asked about, well, how do you know this is going to do what you say it's going to do? Well, one of the things you just heard from Assistant Director Wheeler and certainly Director Messer is that we are going to monitor what the impacts of this code are, and make adjustments moving forward. So I think this council certainly is interested in having a review period on some ongoing basis with many of the folks here to make sure that if in fact we need to make changes down the line, that we will not wait 70 plus years again before we make substantive changes if we need to do so in order for the goals of this initiative to be met. So with that, we're going to move to our public speakers here tonight. I'm going to call two names, so I'll call the first person, and you'll have 3 minutes at the podium. If you're representing any organization, please let us know. I'm also going to call a second person, if they wouldn't mind coming up here waiting, just so we can keep things moving. I do apologize. I will do my best to get everyone's names right. But someone with a name that gets mispronounced from time to time, please blame my head and not my heart when I get that wrong, and please correct it when you get to the microphone. So again, we'll try to keep these moving. So the first individuals, it may be the same person. We had a voicemail that was left several weeks ago when this hearing was announced, who just left their name as Clark. The second person that will be coming before council is Mr. John Clark, so maybe it's one and the same. I don't know, Mr. Clark, if you left a voicemail or not, but we also...
My first name is Clark.
There we go. If you wouldn't mind coming to the podium.
I can do it from here.
We actually need you, we actually need you, no, we actually need you at the podium so that your testimony is captured for folks that may be watching online.
I live in the neighborhood. I live on the east side.
Sir, if you wouldn't mind waiting until you get to just... Well, we have folks that are watching online as well. So if you wouldn't mind coming up to the podium with the microphone. Thank you, sir.
I live on the east side of the river. I access that side of the river about 25, 30 times a week. Now, this is definitely, I'm talking about Olentangy and Henderson.
Mm-hmm.
The Zimmerman property. Does anybody know about this property? Okay. It's across from what we call the Knolls. And I think this is going to destroy the demographics of that entire area, especially at that intersection. He talks about walkability. Yes? You can't walk from that intersection any direction for about 1.5 miles before you find a gas station or the hospital, Riverside Hospital. You go west, you find... Is it Kenny? Kenny, okay? There is no accessibility at all.
Sir,
It's
just so
either
you know, that property is not in this phase. The Zimmerman property,
It's trying,
they've asked, so there's been no additions made to the map pursuant to the advice that was given to us by the city attorney's office. So the parcel that you're speaking about is actually not
are
one
they
of the...
trying to get into phase 2?
So right now, we're talking about this first phase is 6% of the city. We will...
I'm sorry. I mean, I didn't know that, but
Yep. So we are then moving towards additional phases in which we'll likely bring zoning changes to the rest of the city. Those zoning changes, we don't know what those will be yet because we focused on these 6 zoning districts being applicable to these corridors. So once we move off those corridors, one of the things about getting to a different phase is that our folks, city planners, et cetera, will be looking at creating different zoning districts that would be more appropriate for those areas. We may use some of the zoning
I
districts.
heard about a corridor on 161, east of I-71. Do you know that corridor?
I do. That's
It's
also
ripe for picking. You could build so many 10-story buildings on that property, you wouldn't have to do anything except build.
certainly, and we've certainly talked about what future phases look like, but just to be very, very clear, that parcel in question, the Zimmerman property, is not included in
I've
this
seen
phase.
construction going on up there at this moment. I've seen a track hoe, I've seen gravel, I've seen dump trucks, I've seen pickup trucks.
I can't speak to whether or not permits have been issued for that work, and we can certainly send folks out, but I can tell you, in this piece of legislation, that property is
I'm
not
out of
included.
line. I thought this was about, well,
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks for being here, I appreciate it. Glad we could clear that up. Again, next speaker coming for council is Mr. John Clark, and after Mr. Clark, we have Judy Minister. Mr. Clark, welcome back to council.
Thank you. My name is John Clark. Last name Clark, and I really don't do voicemail that well, so you may get an email from me, that's all. But again, my name is John Clark. My wife and I have lived in German Village since moving to Columbus in 1992. We consider ourselves devoted caretakers of this amazing 175-year-old neighborhood. I've spoken at zone-in hearings, and I've had email conversations, not phone messages, with Councilmember Dorans about the wisdom of overlaying the northern border of German Village with zoning districts that would allow new buildings with heights of up to 7 stories. This is the south side of Livingston Avenue. In response to concerns like mine, the council member has introduced revisions to the legislation he says will guarantee the continuation of protections German Village has enjoyed for 6 decades, and I am grateful for that promise. But I remain concerned about any confusion that may arise from a zoning ordinance that says one thing, while the German Village guidelines call very specifically for one another. Our architectural review process has always taken place in conjunction with the zoning code, not at odds with it. If the intent is to safeguard the historic district in the future, why was there a steadfast refusal to exclude the length of Livingston Avenue that overlaps with the historic district from this revision, and instead precisely not 1, but 2 new zone districts within the boundaries of German Village? I am still concerned that you're voting on legislation that contains those 2 blank pages with notations that new rules will come at a later date. Rules to govern the administration of this code and rules regarding the future oversight of boards and commissions. There has been no explanation for this strategy of staggering the rollout of information, so we are left to wonder what is in store once the new zoning districts are codified. The devil is in the details, and you're saying to the citizens of Columbus, trust us on these details. My wife and I also own a boutique tour company. We're privileged to share the story of this amazing city with groups and individuals near and far. Just this year, we're hosting civic leaders from California, soccer VIPs from Manchester, England, and busloads of visitors coming for Oktoberfest. But we would be less than honest if we didn't also share with our visitors Columbus's spotty record regarding historic preservation, from allowing unscrupulous developers to destroy our Union Station facade 50 years ago, to the demolition of the Farmcrest Bakeries building barely 2 months ago, and the continuing threats brought by ill-conceived development plans and a less than clear direction from the city. As you proceed with these unprecedented zoning changes, I urge you to take further action to protect Columbus's rich history. Please direct the Building and Zoning Services Department to leave historic districts out of zone-in phases to come. When we are forced to refer to historic buildings and neighborhoods in the past tense, we have lost an irreplaceable part of the city's soul. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. I want to make one comment and then turn it over to Mr. Wheeler because I think there's a couple things to respond to. So one, we've had lots of conversations with Columbus Landmarks and others about how do we move forward with some actual strategic historical preservation efforts in Columbus. Again, zoning has been used as a proxy for a very long time on those efforts. It makes more sense to have an actual policy that's more reflective of what we want to do as a city. To your comments, yes, the city's been far too easy to demolition many things that have been historical within Columbus, and I think that's a worthy conversation to have, but outside of certainly this context, to make sure that zoning isn't used just for that type of proxy to prevent something from happening, actually have a real policy that addresses these issues. And Assistant Director, I know Mr. Clark had a couple of specific questions around guidelines, et cetera, that's in there. I think that was in your presentation, but could you clarify?
Yeah, and I do want to mention that the commissions that oversee historic districts, the Historic Resources Commission, German Village Commission, Italian Village Commission, and Victorian Village Commission are established through Title 31. No changes are proposed, and they would not be part of Article D. Article D references commission are intended to address the Development Commission, Building Board of Zoning Adjustment commissions that are part of the zoning code as opposed to the preservation code. So one thing I do want to stress is that even though we will continue to rely on the existing zoning code for what do you do when you get a variance application and so on, even when updated, it will not change Title 31. They're separate. The other thing I would say is that we were very deliberate about involving the city attorney's office in helping to write the new language to just reinforce that the design review process definitely is going to sort of speak to, or rather, to put it another way, the building scale, including height, is subject to the application of design review. That happens today, and it will continue to happen.
Thank you, Assistant Director. Sure.
But, you know, Mr. Wheeler, we began meeting with you close to a year ago.
Mr. Clark, I'm sorry, we've got like 22 speakers right here, so we've got to keep this moving. I'm sorry, count.
We began speaking with you more than a year ago about our concerns about South Livingston. That was way before these plans were drawn. You could have drawn them then to leave South Livingston Avenue out of this zoning process entirely.
Our position is that eventually the whole city will be going through the rezoning process or the zoning process. We believe that many of the existing historic districts, we know that many of the existing historic districts, including German Village, do not comply with existing zoning. The zone-in update allows for setbacks, in particular, that are more consistent with historic districts. The elimination of parking requirements provides flexibility that we think is important. And as we look at a corridor that's Livingston Avenue on one end, you have Children's Hospital, a very large employer. On the other end, you have High Street, and the whole thing is across the street from downtown. We just felt it was inappropriate to remove it from the proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Wheeler. Next speaker will come before council, thank you, is Ms. Judy Minister, and after Ms. Minister, we will have Ms. Leah Evans.
Good evening, council members and staff. My name is Judy Minister. I'm a long-term Clintonville resident and business owner and former Clintonville area commissioner. I would agree that the zoning codes need to be updated to align with future goals and needs. However, the zoning codes should also seek to maintain the positive features that make a community unique. For a period of about 15 years, the City of Columbus encouraged neighborhoods to create neighborhood plans. Clintonville's neighborhood plan was adopted in 2009 and modified in 2018. One of the features in our plan is a recognized green district that runs along High Street from East Torrance Road to Overbrook Ravine. It's characterized by lawns in the front of the buildings and numerous mature trees. The district is diverse in its uses and consists of offices, single-family homes, and apartments. The district was excluded from the urban commercial overlay and also the community commercial overlay. Now, 15 years later, with the new zone-in plan, this would eliminate the green district with a new zoning class with a setback of as little as 5 feet from the sidewalk. Columbus has the fastest growing urban heat island in the country. Columbus has only 22% tree coverage. Clintonville still has 38% tree coverage. What will the tree coverage be in 10 years if all these green spaces are lost? I'd like to encourage the thought that green districts could be created citywide as part of the zone-in plan. There would be nothing wrong with duplicating this in other areas, like the Near East Side, particularly the Broad Street corridor. Also, my second topic would be the Cascadia Partners report in the zone-in plan. Basically, this report says that the rezoning and the 6 new classifications would accommodate roughly 5 times as many housing units as currently exist along the Columbus corridors. You might think that's a great accomplishment, but to me, it's a little scary to think about 5 times as many housing units along High Street. Do we have the infrastructure to accommodate that drastic of a change? According to the traffic studies, North High Street in Clintonville sees up to 25,000 cars per day. With a 35-mile-per-hour speed limit on High Street, it seems it would be necessary to drop the speed limit to 25 miles an hour before more buildings are built. This would be just a basic safety concern, especially if those buildings are built Some of the overlays are zero setbacks. I understand the immediate need for housing with job growth in the area. However, most of this job growth in the next 5 years is going to be in the 161 Tech Corridor. And ironically, 161 is not on the corridor plan, and I have to wonder why. This is 18 highway miles from Clintonville. Currently, there's no public transit routes to that region. The 3 proposed Lincoln routes are all city center routes. While Columbus plans to build apartments, suburbs are creating housing opportunities with single-family homes, condos, and apartments. Columbus's plan focuses on apartments for housing, offering new residents only
Ms.
one
Mister, I am going to ask you
style
if
of
you could
living.
wrap up your comments. We have lots of folks here this evening.
Okay, I'm sorry. So I'd like you to consider not excluding single-family homes from your zoning plans in the extreme sense that you have and the sense that you have planned to exclude them in phase 2. As a realtor, I can tell you people in my office, we drive as far away now as Plain City and Marysville to find people affordable homes, and it's because we have underbuilt here. These people would have stayed in Franklin County, but there is nothing to buy. Thank you.
Thank you. Assistant Director Wheeler and Planning Division Manager Mark DeVillis, I don't know if you have any, Kevin, I don't know if you have any comments from the. So Director Messer, could you just follow up? So there was a comment regarding sort of city infrastructure, and I think this has been a common thing that's sort of come up about, is the water and sewer there? Is the traffic there? All these kinds of things. If you could sort of talk about that sort of site plan compliance process that sort of moves through building zoning services that works through other folks, because we're talking about the zoning here, and there's lots of other issues that folks are concerned about, and rightfully so, about the impacts of these developments. Can you just sort of describe a little bit how that works?
Absolutely, President Pro Tem Dorans. Yes, I'd be happy to. So yes, we are talking about the use of the property and some specific guidelines and standards that go along with the structures and buildings on those properties. When you get beyond that and talk about an actual development that's being created, there's a number of different review agencies and codes that are applicable to a project. So one clearly being the building code, which is something that my department implements. So nothing in zoning affects the state requirements under the building code. A lot of different agencies around the city have various requirements that all have to be met that are unaffected by these changes that we're proposing. So our stormwater manual, whether it's water service design plans, whether it's things with public service on roadway improvements and things that are done in conjunction. Fire looks at fire hydrants. We have about 13 different agencies that review every project to make sure that the project is applicable and compliant with all the different codes around the city. And this zoning proposal that we're making doesn't affect any of those. Those will all still be in place and would all still be reviewed as a part of the permit process for any project.
So bottom line, if someone could not meet one of those requirements, whether it's water and sewer, traffic otherwise, they can't get their building permits from you to actually build the thing, right? So even if the thing fits from a zoning standpoint, if they can't check the boxes, they have to go through that site plan compliance, that project can't happen, correct?
That is correct, President Pro Tem. And I would also just add that just as Mr. Wheeler mentioned that in this code we are adding some language just to bolster the fact that this new zoning code, all of the different historic commissions and all the different reviews that take place are still going to be able to be in place. We also are adding some language to clarify the point that you just made, which is that unless projects are compliant with all of these different agencies and codes, I will not be issuing building permits to that applicant.
Thank you. Sister Director Wheeler, I've got one question. I think you've got a comment. So one, the last speaker just talked about the amount of housing that could potentially be built in these 12,300 or so parcels. The vast majority of those parcels, my understanding, are commercial and do not have housing on them right now. So when we talk about how do we get the right housing mix, when we talk about adding, certainly there are some parcels that are within this first phase that are residential, that some that have single family houses on them right now. But certainly the vast vast majority of these parcels, one, are zoned commercial right now, and to do any residential development on them right now, you would need to get a rezoning or variance. This is, again, about that proactive nature of saying, here's where we think housing should go. And many of those parcels right now would not be displacing existing housing, it'd be displacing potentially existing commercial properties.
That's accurate, and both commercial and residential are permitted in these districts. I also wanted to just note a couple things. One is that the Urban General 2 district is in place or proposed for the Green District in Clintonville, and the Urban Core Restricted District is proposed for East Broad Street in the Near East area, both of which include a significantly larger setback. So the setback requirement is that you match the general setback in the area up to 25 feet. So it is a significantly bigger setback. It's also the lowest height limit at 4 stories, which is 1 story above the current allowance for the Urban General 2. That's not the case with East Broad Street. This code is silent with respect to whether a building is an apartment building or a condominium building. And currently there are about 900 single-family homes in these corridors. Over half of them are zoned commercially, and a form of commercial that does not allow residential on the ground floor. So they are non-conforming. So many of the owners of these homes today, if they were to sell that home, the new buyer's lender may require some kind of evidence that they can rebuild. Sometimes that requires a variance. The process is complicating things, or can complicate things. This will eliminate that situation. It'll allow them by right. You can continue to have a single-family home as long as you want. And in fact, you can build an accessory dwelling unit or a carriage house. These are major corridors, and so we think it's important to allow for those kinds of flexibilities.
Thank you.
Chair Dorrance,
Yep.
just real quick, I was remiss in saying that before because I know we have lots of speakers here today and wanted to jump in, but I do want to just express first an invitation. We do have a Link Us Town Hall that is happening tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. at West High School, so folks can learn more about Link Us. The 3 corridors that are furthest along in design are from downtown on West Broad Street all the way to Prairie Township, and from East Broad Street from downtown all the way to Reynoldsburg. And the third is the 161 corridor that will be completed in 3 phases. That would essentially go from Olentangy up through Bethel and then Sawmill all the way through Dublin. So I just wanted to share that with folks because I think as we talk about the transportation system that we are proposing to the city, it does start at the core, but it certainly goes out through several municipalities out to the bordering areas of the city. And so if folks are interested in learning more, understanding the impact of Link Us, understanding the opportunities that will come with Link Us, not just about the bus, but also infrastructure and other opportunities to connect the city and to move people, I invite you to join us tomorrow. It is one of 7 town halls that we will be having throughout the summer and into the fall. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Next speaker to come for council is Ms. Leah Evans, and after Ms. Evans, we'll have Mr. Joe Mosil.
Thank you. Good evening. President Pro Tem Dorrance and esteemed members of council. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be with you once again, speaking up in support of the extensive and expansive work of revising our city's 70-plus-year-old zoning code. I stand here with you voicing my support from several perspectives as a professional housing advocate, as a planner, and as a proud resident of the Northeast neighborhood of Columbus. Zoning regulates how land can be used, period. It seems simple, but it holds a complexity and a reach in our daily lives that touches everything from recreation to transit to workforce to the environment. At one point, I've heard it explained that if a city were a living organism, then zoning would be their genetic code. Now that seems weighty to think that we're changing the genetic code of the city, but in some ways we are. We're adapting. We're building on what has made the city great so that it can remain great for the next generation. This first phase update to our zoning code will allow us to create more balance between the many uses, activities, and needs that we have related to land and place. Zoning reform is not a silver bullet. It will not solve all of our city's challenges related to growth, and it is not intended to. But it is allowing us to collectively set a course forward for a city that is inclusive and equitable, and removing the barriers to our city's ability to adapt and grow with the evolving needs of its residents. Not from a day job. The residents of Columbus are in need. To be pointed, we are currently allowing thousands of our neighbors to be unhoused, displaced, evicted, housing cost burdened, and left behind. Even though we have seen an unprecedented amount of funding committed to housing, both locally, regionally, and at the state level, we are still underbuilding. This is an issue for all of us, renters, homeowners, business owners, educators, civic leaders alike. We cannot keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. This is one step, one change we can make to impact one of our biggest challenges. And at the same time as we address housing, we can also be positively supporting transit, mobility, neighborhood revitalization, and equity. We're at a tipping point, and I applaud the efforts of the mayor, the administration, and council to take bold steps to balance our history and legacy with our bright future and many opportunities. I also want to thank all of those who have participated in the public discourse in person, online, or even by having a conversation amongst their neighbors. We are not all going to like or agree on what the right course is, but we can all remain unified in wanting the best for our city and being willing to work together to get it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Next speaker come before council is Mr. Joe Motil. After Mr. Motil, we'll have Ms. Riley Dean.
Pro Tem Dorns, members of City Council, Joe Motil, 167 West Cook Road. A local preservationist was quoted recently stating, quote, "You are deferring to the developers too much regarding the city's proposed zoning policy." And as a member and zoning chair for the University Area Commission 36 years ago, I've listened to developers and their attorneys complain about everything under the sun for nearly 4 decades. Whether it's parking and height requirements, meeting with area commissioners, or the city's inability to expedite new building applications, you name it, they complain about it. And all citizens are not hardly at the table when developers, zoning attorneys, and their law firms, architects, and engineers are the primary campaign contributors to the mayor and many of our city council members. The non-compromising, high-density at all costs, unaffordable housing fanatics have cried foul by accusing German Village and other local preservationists as NIMBYs just because they wish to save the historical character and identity of their neighborhoods. It's either give the YIMBYs everything they want or nothing at all. As written, Zone-In will accelerate the extermination of our neighborhood's identity and historic structures forever to the highest bidder unless safeguards are incorporated into the Zone-In policy to protect non-designated historic structures. If adequate amendments are not made, City Council will have turned its back on the importance of maintaining a neighborhood's identity and its history. We do not need to earmark 12,300 parcels across the city to the highest bidder or greedy developer in order to appropriately address our housing crisis. Creating a new zoning district to protect non-designated historic parcels could be one way of protecting our neighborhood's historic and identifying structures. The city's Historic Preservation Office, along with the Ohio History Connection, Columbus Landmarks, could all work together in determining which structures that are not officially designated on the Columbus Register should be protected. And we are probably talking about less than 200 parcels. This is a very large contingency of residents throughout Columbus that support policy changes to protect our historic structures. Short-sighted individuals who feel that a city's progress is solely dictated by the sight of cranes in new nondescript garden variety apartment buildings will never recognize the value of saving our city's historic structures. We only have one shot at getting our new zoning policy right, and extending the public comment another 60 days in order to include crucial amendments is the right thing to do. UGN1 zoning district setbacks are set at 0 to 15 feet, UGN2 setbacks at 5 to 25. These two districts encompass nearly the entire North High Street corridor in Clintonville. If new apartments are constructed, much-needed green space and tree canopy coverage that is an identifying characteristic of Clintonville will be lost forever, and many of these new structures are occupied by small business owners. Clintonville has a thriving long history of serving small businesses, and I'm quite certain that this situation does not apply only to Clintonville. In closing, we should not be trying to maintain our city's #1 heat island effect ranking in the country or reducing our embarrassing 22% tree canopy coverage ranking by removing green space and cutting down 30 to 60 foot tall trees so we can just build a 4-story apartment building almost right up to the sidewalk and closer to the street. And who ultimately decides what these setbacks will be that were for the UGN 1 and 2. And for the sake of historic preservation, I'm also suggesting that the Old North neighborhood High Street corridor between Lane and Arcadia be reclassified from UC2 to UGN 2, and that the maximum 10-foot high parapet wall in the UGN 1 and 2 districts be reduced to 5 feet. You don't need a 10-foot parapet wall on an apartment building. It's not going to do any good except add for additional site height that we don't need already. So I could talk more about that if you'd like to know. I've been on several hundred roofs in my day as a construction worker, and it's hard to find just a 4-foot parapet wall most of the time. So again, 10 foot's a little bit extreme. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Motel. Next speaker from our council is Ms. Riley Dean. After Ms. Dean, we have Glenn Tumala. Ms. Dean, welcome back to council.
Good afternoon, President Pro Tem Dorans and members of the Zoning Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today regarding the City of Columbus's proposed updates to the zoning code. My name is Riley Dean, and I am the Political Associate at the Ohio Environmental Council Action Fund. The OEC Action Fund is proud to support this first phase of legislation. Increased density is a key feature of modern, sustainable cities. The new zoning code's commitment to increased density as a default option for developers with no parking minimum are wins for the environment. The updated zoning code will create a more walkable, livable city for many residents. Furthermore, the OEC Action Fund appreciates the goal of creating dense corridors that correspond with long-term visions for Link Us. Increased use of public transit in Columbus is essential to decreasing carbon emissions created by transportation. Cohabitating denser development along proposed bus rapid transit corridors will make it significantly easier for Columbus residents to go about their day without utilizing their personal vehicles. Additionally, we are glad to see that amendments added to this proposed update encourage walkable neighborhoods, support transit, and reduce environmental impacts of growth. As the zoning code update is implemented and Council considers more phases of updates, we encourage Council to integrate more features of the Columbus Climate Action Plan into those phases to further enhance its zoning code. Incentives for residential and commercial solar, urban farming, green roofs, water and energy efficiency standards, and other measurable goals of the Climate Action Plan can all provide benefits to Columbus residents and help further mitigate the effects of climate change. In summary, we support the many sustainability initiatives included in this first phase of updates to Columbus's zoning code, given the significance of this update and its scale. As Columbus continues through future phases of zoning code updates, Council should continue to take advantage of this historic opportunity to create a comprehensive code that continues to incentivize green development and carbon emissions reduction. Columbus residents deserve ambitious pursuit of the goals in the Climate Action Plan. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Dean. Any questions from my colleagues? Councilmember Weich?
Not a question, but a comment. Do appreciate you being here and your advocacy. We have definitely heard from a number of residents related to green spaces and trees, and it is something my office and other offices are concerned about. There are a lot of things that came up that were zoning adjacent, and so there will probably additional legislation that will come related to those things. Obviously, this is focused on the zoning code, but we do appreciate the advocacy. That's real.
For sure, we appreciate that as well, and we look forward to continue to working with your office on that.
Thank you, Ms. Dean. Appreciate you being here. Next speaker come before council is Mr. Glenn Tumala. After Ms. Tumala, we will have Mr. Nate Wilkins.
Thank you to the 4 city council members who are still here. Man, last time I spoke, President Hardin walked out right before I spoke last time, so I hope it's nothing personal. Talk to him, make sure it's nothing that I said, but thank you for being here. My name is Glenn Tumala. My wife and I live on the east side of Columbus. We love the city. We think it's terrific, and I want to say a big thank you as well because I love puzzles. And zone-in is a huge puzzle. It is amazing to figure out where everybody goes and where everyone's interested in everything. But as I said last time, The real question is trust in the city government and losing that trust in our city government, losing the trust in democracy. That's what's going on. We're not addressing climate change or the heat dome. No, we're not addressing homelessness. We're not doing that. This is a massive transfer of wealth to the corridors. The corridors are for the wealthy. That's what we're doing. The city is saying, hey, great, wealthy people live in these corridors. The wealthy don't take mass transit either, so they're going to need cars, and that's going to contribute to that. We're not building solar or green spaces or public art or anything. This is corridors for the wealthy. And as one of my family members asked me, are we Democrats? Because I know you're not Republicans, but Democrats care and listen to people and concerns. These are passionate people out here that live here. The developers that give you tens of thousands of dollars, they help you get elected, but they don't pay your salary and they don't live here. They live in California and Colorado. Hey, this is a great book. And if you have not read this book, you should really read this book, Boomtown Columbus. It's by an emeritus OSU professor. You have a copy because I sent you all a copy. You have a copy. This is a great book. You should read it. It's all about developers and how they control government. It is not happy reading for children, all right? This is like reading Howard Zinn. It lets you know what's going on, but it is somewhat depressing. You should read this book before you vote on this. If you can vote yes on this zoning proposal after having read this book, wow, that's going to concern me, because we're now at the point of the sunk cost fallacy where we've put so much work into this that you have to vote yes on this proposal. And that's not true, because this proposal, beyond being perfect, it's about money. It's all about money. I have a couple great neighbors, and one of my neighbors told me that you should really consider the donations that you're getting from developers. And I've looked online, I've read all the donations that you get from developers, the four of us here. You should take half of those donations and give them to charity. I'm not kidding, that would be awesome. That would tell us that you don't work for developers or the wealthy donor elite. But that's up to you. I love Columbus. I love every one of you, and I hope that you do this right, because there's no going back after this. Good luck.
Thank you. The next speaker we have from our council is Mr. Nate Wilkins. After Mr. Wilkins, we have Ms. Monica Tuttle. Welcome back to council. Thank you, Nate. Appreciate it.
1612 Arlington Avenue, Mr. Lieutenant George Wilkins. I'm not going to take up all your time. Rob Dorrance, you got a packet, and this other lady here, I think it's Mrs. Green. I don't know, but again, 1612. I do like this idea, and like I say, my whole thing now is taking a new idea, a new era in time. Linden area has been over-neglected for over a decade in time, and I call this a new era in time. As the old saying that I listen to a lot of rock music, my famous rock artist is Sammy Hagar. Right now, to get it right. I just want to understand that this thing here, there's a couple of colleagues too, the art gallery took the time to really put this together. And I know Cleveland Avenue has been neglected and South Linden has been neglected. When we talk about bringing housing here to the Columbus, Ohio area, I'm all for that. If that's in not houses, but more apartments, accessibility, transit, bus service, might as well do so now, because now is the time we're going to need this. I understand people don't like the change, but it's going to have to happen now. You know, we're here, now we're going to have to deal with the problem. You know, to move these people back and forth to work in hospitals, we got to have mass transportation out here. If we don't have this in place the next 30 years, people are going to be walking and losing their homes. Also, with the disability and blind folks, we want to have this stuff included on the corridors and major corridor and bus lines out here. I didn't hear anything about the visually impaired population or the disability or the people that's in wheelchairs. Those seem like those are people who are getting left out all the time. I just told my wife today as I was coming down here, we are going to have to look at these people cannot be left behind. They're a part of the solution. They're a part of our city. You know, once we don't put this in front, we also got to look at this people that's on a fixed income and all this other stuff. So again, I'm all for this as 200%. Let's go move on to phase 2 and 3. Thank you for my time.
Thank you, Mr. Wilkins. I did want to mention when we do move to future phases, so there was a advisory group that was put together of area commissioners, other folks, community advocates that helped impart a lot of sort of the ongoing work when this initial proposal was developed. I think in future phases, if that group is brought back together, which I have every expectation it would be, I think we will make sure that someone from the disability community is represented within that. We think that there's some enhancements, as Mr. Wheeler mentioned, about more ground floor residential, which should be helpful to folks that are differently abled, but we do want to make sure those perspectives are brought earlier in the process than they were here. Next speaker to come before council is Ms. Monica Tuttle. After Ms. Tuttle, we have Michael Gallagher.
Thank you, City Council. Thank you, City staff, for being here. I want to commend everybody who's here and who's listening and who's engaging. I think what's really important to keep in mind is that we are taking away the voice of the residents when we are eliminating the civic associations and the area commissions from this. I understand that the goal is that we're making the right product, so we don't need those variances and we don't need those other rezonings. But I have heard time and time again from my neighbors in my area that there are certain things that are part of this that they don't want, particularly car washes in the Northwest Avenue. I know you guys have heard me ringing my car wash bell for a long time. It's because that's what my neighbors have been telling me. And my concern right now is that that doesn't fit any of the priorities that we are talking about with Zone In. It's something we've gotten neighborhood feedback about consistently and substantially, and yet we haven't listened and we haven't responded to that. I think that it would be highly beneficial to table this and to give the mayor's office a little bit more time to make some additional revisions. I think that the first round of revisions was fabulous. They very much responded to a lot of the feedback, and we saw the list of issues and we saw the list of feedback. The problem is we didn't hear that piece about how individuals can still remain involved. Yes, there's the development tracker. Yes, I can be notified when something is happening, but there isn't a mechanism for me to share my thoughts on that. There isn't even a checkbox that the local area commission or civic association was made aware. Additionally, my civic association has reached out a number of times to Zone In, trying to provide additional feedback, trying to be part of the committee, and our local area plan wasn't very much considered. It's not really reflected in the Zone In, so the specificities of our area have not been incorporated, and I think that that's really important. Getting it right is more important than getting it done right now, especially when we're eliminating that further feedback and that community involvement. And that's why, especially in light of the recent communication difficulties that City Council and the city across the board have had, the zoning update at columbus.gov email does not work. Neighborhood liaison emails do not work. City council member emails do not work. I understand that there has been an outreach and a setting up of Gmail accounts and other workarounds. But in this really pivotal moment, we aren't able to communicate with those people that are representing our interests. And for that reason, I understand the motivation to get this done before recess. I would really encourage City Council to consider postponing it and tabling it and allowing the city to make some additional amendments as proposed.
Thank you, Ms. Tuttle. I do want to ask Assistant Director Wheeler to address the question that Ms. Tuttle's brought up a number of times around audio-oriented uses in some of the more suburban districts. And then I also want to ask Mr. DeVillis if you could address sort of the issue of sort of area plans and how they've considered and sort of overlaid within sort of this process, and sort of how helpful some of those area plans are and aren't based upon their ages.
Thank you, Council President Pro Tem Dorans. I'm actually going to ask Shannon Pine, who's the chief zoning official, to talk about car washes in generally, and she can talk about both zoning and then design guidelines.
Yes. Good evening. Thank you, President Pro Tem Dorans and members of council. Car washes are proposed to be allowable uses in both the CAC and RAC districts. The building itself would have to comply with the design guidelines of the new code, meaning that it would have to have a frontage type. There are 9 different frontage types proposed within the Title 34 building design standards, and a garage door is not one of those. A garage door is not included as being one of those types of frontage types. You have porches, you have stoops, you have shop front entries. There's also other design standards with window transparency, massing and articulation that a car wash building probably would not meet without needing a variance. Another important factor for the design standards are that parking, stacking, and circulation are not permitted in front of the building, between the building and the street. I don't know how someone could build a car wash without having that proposed. So although they're allowed, it's probably going to be extremely difficult for a car wash to be developed under this new code.
And Ms. Pine, if someone proposed a car wash, couldn't check those boxes you just mentioned from the design elements of this, what would be their, and that applicant wanted to move forward, what would be their process in order to be able to be able to build a car wash there?
Yeah, so it would go before the Board of Zoning Adjustment for a development standard variance, which is about a 2 to 3 month process. Currently, there's nothing changing with the Board of Zoning Adjustment process proposed in this code change right now. So the application would be submitted to our office. It would be forwarded to the community group for their recommendation, and the public hearing would be held as per normal.
That would only be if they didn't meet the design standards.
Correct. And what Ms. Pine just said is that it's going to be extraordinarily difficult for a car wash to meet those standards.
But we still don't want them.
Well,
so why is the use permitted if, I mean, they're not permitted on those parcels?
I want to be responsive and make sure we're keeping this moving. Mr. DeVillis, can you speak to the issue of sort of area plans and how those were incorporated into this?
Sure, President Pro Tem Dorans, members of council. We carefully considered plan recommendations. It was one of the primary policy bases for the development of the districts, the map districts throughout the city. So Clintonville plan was referenced tonight, and the Northwest plan, I think, was adopted in 2016. Indeed, one of the primary recommendations is mixed-use corridors along Bethel, Henderson, and Sawmill Road. And indeed, Zone In will deliver on those districts that recommend that intensification. And also the design standards as recommended in the plan will be codified in the form of the frontage requirements that Ms. Pine just mentioned and other means. So we're heartened, frankly, by the deliverance that Zone In is going to bring of these plan recommendations that have been developed over decades. And, we're more than happy as a follow-up to talk more about the plan and how, Zone In relates.
Thank you. Next speaker will come for our council is Mr. Michael Gallagher. After Mr. Gallagher, we have Ms. Mindy Justice.
Somebody else is leaving. I hope I didn't do that. President Pro Tem Dorans, rest of the City Council here tonight, Zone In team, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I spoke last at the Parsons Avenue, talking about the conflicts with the German Village Commission and so forth. I appreciate the respect that the zoning team and City Council has given those who spoke regarding those conflicts and potential conflicts between historic neighborhoods and the guidelines in Zone In Phase 1. I understand there's going to be multiple phases to the Zone In plan. I would like to request and in support of the amendments that have been made and protections for the commissions to consider on future phases to once again come back and look at those parcels. And if they can't be removed from the overlay, I would like to have them with designations that align with the current guidelines. The guidelines have been adopted by a member of the German Village guidelines that were codified with the city were adopted by a number of historic neighborhoods in the city so they didn't have to rewrite their own. It seems fair that you should be able to come up with some overlay or some designations for parcels that meet those guidelines and replace them on the maps to remove any potential conflict or misunderstanding between the commissions and the zoning updates. So, thank you.
Yep, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the comments and folks working through that issue with us over the last several months. And certainly, as I've mentioned, this is not the end of anything, and I appreciate you mentioning that in your comments about there are many, many issues, both of them zoning and sort of zoning adjacent stuff that we're going to have to work on over the next several years to make sure we get this as right as possible, and then make sure we're monitoring it as it moves forward as well, and make adjustments based on that too. Yep.
Yeah, and I think the thing that we need to consider is because those guidelines were adopted by a number of neighborhoods, it should be possible to come back and come up with a couple of designations that align with those that would meet a lot of the problems in historic areas and just replace those overlays.
Appreciate the suggestion. Thank you. Next speaker come for council is Ms. Mindy Justice. After Ms. Justice, we have Bruce Mann.
Chair Dorans, council members, city leaders, thank you for the time today. I am Mindy Justice, co-founder of Neighbors for More Neighbors Columbus, and a proud downtown resident where we have had a lack of parking requirement for multiple decades, and it's still working, nothing broke. Some people call us, they call me the region's YIMBY group, that YIMBY girl, those yes in my backyard people, and that is true. Some people who are talking tonight, in fact, live in really desirable neighborhoods, and they'll come to you today with testimony they already have about exclusion, about people packing, property values, keeping renters out, keeping people away, those gnarly renters. Some even think that they are championing the people while they're actually keeping people from housing, smack dab in the middle of a housing crisis. I encourage you to not listen. These people are usually against everything and offer few, if any, solutions. I'd like to say that facts bear. German Village used to be home to 10,000 people. At just 50% of its former population today, German Village lacks its former vitality. It could be said that this is actually the basis of the character we should be aspiring to. During this process, I've heard a lot of feedback on sustainability. We heard some very deep and deliberate testimony from the experts on that. I want to say that when people talk about removing trees, it's a yes and. Yes, that's a problem. We don't want to do it. We have to maybe get rid of a tree or two in order to get to where we need to be. In fact, as they mentioned, density conserves land. It's a really big conservation factor. It's proven scientifically. Building taller and tighter makes neighborhoods less wasteful, more energy efficient, reduces transportation related greenhouse gas emissions. Larger, denser cities are cleaner and greener than small city suburbs and even small towns. Recently, my friend Brent Swander and the Columbus Realtors team hosted an important conversation around the state of housing in the Columbus region as a whole. John Melkai said something that I think is worth repeating here. It is absolutely critical that amidst all of the negativity, we give our elected leaders space, that we give them space to be bold and perform real leadership. That is what you're here to do. I'm here in support of this legislation, and for just that reason, change is hard, change is messy. Thank you for your public service. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you, Ms. Justice. Any questions from council members? Seeing none, appreciate you being here. Next speaker come before council is Mr. Bruce Mann. After Mr. Mann, we have Todd Hunkins.
Councilmember Pro Tem Dorans and member of the council. My name is Bruce Mann. I'm going to be kind of a little bit of a different opinion than some of my fellow residents. I'm, 57, live in Clintonville, upper middle class, but I am one of those renters. Yes, bad renter. I also rely primarily on public transportation. I am here because we may disagree about certain particular buildings within a project. We can't make that the enemy of the overall zoning change that is necessary. We are the only city or the only area in the state that is growing. We're pushing 1 million people, right? We're going to be the largest metro area in Ohio soon. Sorry, Cincy. Look, I understand there are real concerns about some development. These are business people, right? I get it. Not all development is good. We've all been to Lewis Center, right? But one of the things we do have to remember is that with the changes in our city that is happening, whether we like it or not, I'm from Youngstown. Youngstown would beg to have our problems. But what we have to remember is that housing is a need, and the affordability isn't going to go down if we restrict housing, right? So I guess what I just want to say is every time I walk past some of these homes in Clintonville, I see these signs saying, hate has no home here. We should live up to those values and not hate new homes and new neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mann. I appreciate it. Next speaker to come before council is Mr. Todd Hunkins. Mr. Hunkins, welcome to council. And after Mr. Hunkins, we have Mr. Drew Campbell.
Thank you, Commission, for allowing me to speak tonight. My name is Todd Hunkins. I was born and raised, and I still reside in Columbus, Ohio. I'm 60 years old. I wanted to respond to the recent influx of permitting of the car washes within the Columbus area, especially the North Corridor, represented within the Northwest Civic Association. I always try to look at the long and short-term effects of decisions I make and any business, how it will work in the area in a positive or a negative aspect, and last, would I be willing to live next door to the business once it is in operation? Though profitability and survival of a business are important, the consideration of how it will affect the community are important also. A car wash has its place, but not near housing. Any housing, whether it be low or high income district, young or old. They also present a lot of traffic, noise, and environmental pollution from the vehicles waiting to be serviced to the chemicals they use. Columbus continues to grow, and in some aspects, we are at peak load in trying to deal with the challenges. CODA, for example, is working on initiatives to lessen traffic and the effects of pollution by proposing Link Us and purchasing new nitrogen buses with a road range of 300 miles, which are green initiatives and socioeconomically productive for all, red, yellow, black or white, rich or poor. I personally believe a car wash approval can be counterproductive to some of the new plans Columbus is working to resolve for everyone. Though parts of Columbus are transient, there are others who will feel the effects of your decisions for a lifetime. Your job is important to you and to all of us, for the short and the long term. All I ask that you please consider what the community wants in the long term versus what you may feel can be approved quick and in short term. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Hunkins. I know, Chief Zone Official Pine, I don't know if you had anything to add from the comments earlier regarding car washes.
Just that I think it's going to be very hard for them to be developed without variances.
Yep, thank you. Again, next speaker to come for council is Mr. Drew Campbell. After Mr. Campbell, we have Ms. Sandy Cimbrio.
Well, my name is Drew Campbell, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. And I also want to start by thanking all of you for the really hard work you've undertaken here. It is important, it's challenging, and it confronts you with a lot of difficult decisions, and I appreciate that. And I support many of the ideas, many of the concepts. These are things that are really going to be important for us. I will share with you that I do feel a little bit like I might become the salami at the cutting edge of an experiment, because some of the concepts are really good, but some of the details are troubling. For example, I read the Cascadia Partners report where they talked about population density. So I understand that we like to increase density, but they're suggesting that we're looking at a 5-fold increase in population density if the zoning plan works as it's proposed. And I am concerned about that because that's an extraordinary increase. It's going to fall in a very small geographic area. That is going to have a major impact on the character of the neighborhood I live in, which is Clintonville. I'm not from Columbus originally, but I've been here for 40+ years. And I don't think that serves one of the goals of the plan here, which is to support Main Street business. I think Main Street business on High Street would be among the first casualties of the redevelopment that would be inevitable under this program. I'm also concerned about the degree to which this will actually result in affordable housing, because the Cascadia group said that the primary reason why these neighborhoods were selected for Phase 1 was because you could get higher rents there. That's probably right. It seems unlikely to me that we're going to see a material increase in the number of truly affordable housing units that would come out of this. That's another significant concern that I have. I'm also concerned about the degree to which some of the underlying elements of this claim will actually advance equity in the city. I understand that tax abatements are still a tool that will be available to developers. I think that those are fundamentally unfair, in part because they really disproportionately hurt the lowest income folks for whom their rent contains a component related to the property tax that others may not have to pay. It also disproportionately impacts those who live on a fixed income, who will find it difficult to continue to meet that load, as some of their new neighbors, who will be among the wealthier residents in Columbus, aren't paying their fair share for the public services they're going to have to use. So I would ask you all to consider some of the suggestions you've heard here tonight and before. I would like to see the density ratios reduced, because I think that's going to help livability. I think it's going to help ease some of the issues we have, even as we advance incrementally some of the concerns we have here in the city. And I appreciate the time you've all given, all the public input you've asked for, and so I just ask you continue in that vein and see if we can't sort of pull back a little bit on some of the proposals that we've heard from this plan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Campbell. Ms. Prosser, could you speak overall about sort of the approach that the housing market, just generally as it relates to sort of zoning generally, there's both the argument on sort of increasing the supply as it relates to making sure that that helps to stabilize the marketplace by just bringing more housing generally online. Mr. Campbell talked about, from a tax incentive standpoint, how that has intended and unintended consequences within it. And we can speak about how that sort of layers on top of this when we talk about the CRA policy that exists and sort of the density bonuses that are also available within this. And just to be clear, when we talk about reducing or increasing density in certain areas, when we talk about 5-fold increase, that's going to look different across these corridors, considering, some are zoned for a minimum at 4 stories, some are zoned where you may be able to build 16 stories, and we don't know quite where those that development will be, other than we know where the zoning would allow it. So I know that's a bit of a long wind up there, but I think you know what I'm getting at, and if you could address Mr. Campbell's comments, I'd appreciate it.
Certainly. Thank you, President Pro Tem Dorans, members of council. As we look at the proposed zoning updates and we think about adding that density along the corridors, it really does support a number of priorities. But in terms of affordability in particular, we know that there's 3 primary ways we can deliver affordability in our community, and the first is supply. We need to have enough housing. We're seeing the outcomes today of the underbuilding that happened between 2010 and 2020 as we've continued to have folks join us in the Central Ohio community. By adding the density along the corridors, it's a place that's well served, that can adapt to that density, but also allow us to bring that supply onto a location where it's connected to transit and other opportunities. The second way we achieve affordability is through design. and allowing variety types of housing to be built, and especially along our corridors. The zone-in, as proposed, will allow us to go up to 4 stories. It'll allow us to go up to, at times, 16. However, each of those developments is going to come in a little bit differently. And the flexibility and the predictability offered by the proposal will allow developers that are smaller, our emerging developers, to bring us a lot of different types of products along our corridors. So that design becomes really important, and that flexibility becomes really important. The final piece is subsidy, right? With the times where we are able to either take our public dollars and put them into a project to allow us to have income qualified affordability where it's assigned to a family in that income bracket. But then we also have the use of tools as part of that, or incentives as a tool for those subsidies. In the case of the residential tax incentive policy that council reviews every 3 years, and really holds us accountable to make sure that we are getting as much affordability out of that policy as we can. We will be looking at it again in 2025, but it is really the only tool that we have under the Ohio Revised Code to include affordable units in market rate projects, really reaching the priority of mixed income communities and adding that economic diversity in our communities. The proposal for Zone In also really leverages that investment in our residential tax incentive policy by allowing us to utilize that and pair it with increased densities in certain areas in exchange for those affordable units to be included. And they're not just less expensive units when we talk about affordability, when we have an incentive or a subsidy associated. It means that they're income qualified and they are protected for that period of time. And we have a compliance process by which those developments are held accountable. So it is a really meaningful contribution along the corridors to add the really specific affordability, add the supply we need to relieve pressure on our neighborhoods so that we don't exacerbate the loss of natural affordability, and then also allowing just a really wide variety of housing to meet the needs of our community members, whether they're young professionals just joining us in the community, or they are empty nesters ready to transition out of their single-family home and looking for a different type of housing. So the zone-in proposal adds that flexibility, but also predictability, really expanding the housing we can offer in the most critical corridors in our city.
Thank you. And one thing I do want to highlight, because we did talk about the change that the amendment that is included here about the parking mitigation study. So we're talking about if a development does not have a 1-to-1, so 1 parking spot per 1 unit, that's what triggers that parking mitigation study to look at, are there other things that we should require that housing provider to do to mitigate the impact potentially on that neighborhood. One thing to be very clear, there are some exemptions that are within that. One of them is for 100% affordable housing projects. So Lee Evans, who was here earlier tonight, she's the CEO of Homeport, which is one of our affordable housing developers within Columbus. Her projects, 100% affordable, would be exempted from that. And if you could just talk a little bit about how parking sort of interplays there. So we've laid out a lot of different tools that gets us to hopefully having a meaningful impact as far as for housing in the marketplace. But that's a really important one that we've heard from those affordable housing partners, that really either takes away land that they could build more housing on or just runs up costs. So if you could speak to that just very quickly, if you wouldn't mind.
Certainly, I'll do my best in our conversations with Mr. Goodwin and thinking about the interplay between housing and parking, and what we know is really important, that we want to prioritize people and we want to prioritize housing. When we look at kind of the antiquated requirements around parking for housing, we know a lot of, especially our affordable housing developers, don't need that much. And allowing them to right-size that parking to meet the needs of their residents and be responsive to that without burdening the project with additional parking, either parking that doesn't get utilized, or in a lot of cases, they'll go ahead and achieve what we require on parking, but they'll drop the densities and we'll lose housing units to get to that parking ratio. Either way, we lose units, we lose affordability. And in the case where we have the opportunity through the Department of Public Service to really work with the developers when they may not, when they are below that threshold, that'll be really critical. But allowing that flexibility and predictability, again, to bring that housing into the community as a priority.
And not only that, but also adding more impermeable surfaces that then takes away green space. That, again, when we've had lots of comments tonight about sustainability, and parking lots are not sustainable. you can plant some trees, but the whole concept is not one that certainly adds sustainability for a neighborhood or a development. So thank you. Next speaker to come for council is Ms. Sandy Cimbro. After Ms. Cimbro, we have Mr. Christopher Epperson.
Good evening. I have been stood here for 10 years.
Welcome
I
back.
think I'd have to. This is only the last 20 years of what I know about zoning and variance. And in Mr. Wheeler's words, too many words. Too many words. Way too many words with no action. I have said at this dais before, we do not wish to be like any other city in these United States. We want everyone from coast to coast to look around and go, look at Columbus. They're doing it different. Look what they're doing. Look at their success. Let's be like them. I don't want to be the copycat. The best form of flattery is to be copied. I want somebody to copy us. It was really hard for me to know where to start with this for 3 minutes. I'd also like to remind you, and you, that you all work at the pleasure of the electorate. We decide that you're going to serve. You've said you're willing, and we said, okay, this looks like a good group. Didn't mean to leave you out. And so we say yes. So you are here to do our bidding, not your bidding. It's not what you think is right. It's what those people, not the people that are paid to come up here and talk to you, not those people. It's the people who have lived here all their lives or 5 years. The people who rent, the people who own. On my street, I'm lucky. I've got it all. On my block, I've got it all. The variance process is hard for a reason, because things in this life that are hard are usually good. The stuff that comes easy to you, it's throwaway. So if you can do it quickly, it probably really wasn't worth it. And nothing about Zone In Columbus has anything to do with affordability. It sounds good, it feels good, but let's face it, there's a thing called building cost, and there's materials, there's labor. Come on, Mr. Dorrance, you know about building cost. The rezoning seems to be taking property rights. It seems that we talk about building tall buildings, and to me, that's warehousing people. And if you haven't watched the movie Soylent Green, I suggest you do so. Because when they got enough people in a small enough place and they got hungry enough and they ran out of food, they ate the people. Is that what we want to do? Do we want to invite so many people into the density that we end up eating our own? And when it comes to not in my backyard or whatever else, it seems to me that there was some prejudices and jealousies mentioned here earlier. And just because someone can't afford something or someone can afford something doesn't make them any different. They're first and foremost human beings.
Thank you, Ms. Sembro. Might be our first Soylent Green reference on the floor. The next speaker to come for council, Mr. Christopher Epperson. After Mr. Epperson, we have Nancy Kuehl. Apologize if I got that wrong.
Honorable members of council, my name is Christopher Epperson. I am a resident of Wineland Park and a member of the local advocacy group Strong Towns Columbus. I would like to extend my sincere gratitude for your commitment to reforming our outdated zoning code and for your continuing commitment to community engagement. I am in favor of the proposed zoning code, and I ask that you vote to approve it. Even though I support the legislation overall, I believe there are parts which will need to be updated once the code is passed. Today, I want to focus on the current draft's requirement for parking impact studies. It is almost impossible to accurately predict parking. The proposed guidelines assume typical parking demand for residential developments at a parking ratio of 1 parking space per residential unit. If you look at the definition of a residential unit, it's a self-contained place that has pretty much everything you need to live. Sleeping areas, bathrooms, etc. But most importantly, one kitchen, With that definition, the guidelines assume they can estimate parking demand a new developments will create by counting the number of kitchens in the building. This leads to bizarre outcomes. If the 12-plex studio apartments building built in the 1920s that I live in was proposed today, the proposed guidelines would require a parking impact study and may even charge $5,750 fee for every impacted block face or side of the street. In reality, my apartment has no off-street parking and it functions perfectly well. However, if a developer proposed an apartment complex for young adults that had anywhere from 40 to 16 bedrooms where people rent the individual bedroom, it would not need a parking study. Why? Because my building has 12 kitchens and their building only has 10 kitchens. If you want to see an example of this kind of happening in the real world, the 9th Avenue Beer Stoop development kind of came into this exact same thing. So that's kind of the wonkiness happening there with that definition. The city has been given the impossible task of predicting the demand for parking without knowing each and every individual who will ever live in a development. Requiring parking impact studies and their associated mitigations and fees only incentivizes developers to build more parking. More parking will discourage walkability and encourage car ownership, leading to the exact opposite thing we want: more residents with cars and therefore more demand for parking. Even if we could accurately predict parking demand, why should we prioritize parking over competing issues like housing people? If we prioritize people over parking, then we should require an impact study for off-street parking to determine how many potential homes will be lost to storage for cars. We should study how many car trips along 4th Street a proposed parking lot will induce, which will add to the sticky brown exhaust dust that currently covers my apartment and others in Wineland Park. We should study how the parking spots will contribute to auto-centric design that impacts the low-income families in my neighborhood who are already extremely cost-burdened with transportation costs. Members of council, I know that you care more about our citizens than you care about parking. You would not have embarked on this historic zoning code reform if you did not. I believe that this parking impact study requirement is not aligned with the broader goals of this proposal. And with all due respect, I believe that the proposal requirements was caused by the vestigial value of traffic engineers and city planners of the 1950s, which prioritized the automobile over all else. We have to fix the damage caused to our city by car-centric design, and zone-in is one of the first and most important steps in the walk ahead. I fully support the approval of the proposed zoning code updates, but ask that you reconsider the parking study requirements in future revisions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Epperson. Appreciate it. Next speaker to come for council is Ms. Nancy Kuehl. And after Ms. Kuehl, we have Mr. Jared Cape.
Good evening. Oh, not too short.
Thank you for adjusting. Sometimes it goes all kinds of places, so appreciate that.
Well, appreciate you allowing me time to speak tonight. I do have some written comments, but I took a lot of notes, so I'm just going to, some observations. My name is Nancy Kuehl. I'm a 35-plus year resident of the city of Columbus in the neighborhood of Clintonville. I'm a former Clintonville area commissioner, worked on the neighborhood plan, did a lot of good things with that. Right now, tonight, I'm here to strongly urge you to continue the public comment period on this proposal. This is a significantly impactful proposal. 60 days is not enough time. Just because it's the most time you've ever had for public comment doesn't mean it's the right amount of time. There needs to be more time on this. There's too many holes, there's too many questions, too many what ifs. There are over 900,000 residents in the city of Columbus, and depending on what source you're looking at today, the marketing website for Zone-In said that as of today's meeting, there was 2,000 online comments received. Dozens of people commented at 3 public meetings. Now we have 4. Then tonight, a couple people mentioned 5,000 responses or 27,000 responses. That's still 3% of the people that live, work, and pay taxes in the city of Columbus that have responded about this project. More time is needed to look at the full impact of this. Mayor Ginther said, and I quote, "Housing should be available to everyone in opportunity-rich neighborhoods at affordable price points." We should be looking at making all neighborhoods opportunity-rich neighborhoods, not just certain sections. I know this is a segmented project and there's different phases, but someone mentioned it, it's like there's money involved, and it's not creating strong communities with character and connection. It's building a bunch of stuff that people can come and be in for a little while, maybe even mostly transient. It needs more study, it needs more public input, it needs more time. I've heard at the public meeting I was at, and a couple times tonight, well, in a couple years, if we look at it again, it's not working, we can revisit that. Not after you spend millions upon millions of dollars and created all kinds of buildings and reconfigured communities. That's not the way to approach it. You want to have, in my opinion, a much broader-based outlook with this and look at more of the things that are involved. The water, sure, you gotta have your plan. The water still, when it rains, sewage goes into our waterways. Just because somebody's adding a new building that responds to the code right now, the sewage is still going in the waterways, and we're going to bring all these other people in. There's too many holes in this. No one's saying, well, some people are. Well, I'm not saying that things don't need to be looked at and changed. I'm not saying development is bad. I am saying that tax abatements and giving things away to people without paying taxes is not fair to the people that live and work in the city of Columbus and do pay their taxes. That is all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate being here. Next speaker to come for council is Mr. Jared Cape, and after Mr. Cape, we have Ms. Vicky Boggs.
Thank you, council members, for allowing me to speak today. It's great to see you all back here. I'm Jared. I am the secretary for the Short North Civic Association. I happily live in Victorian Village. I share a house with my fiance and another couple. In the next year, we'll be married and we'll be looking at living in one of the new places that are going to be made available under this process. So this process is for people like me, and I'm really excited about the opportunities that it's going to offer to the city as it grows, becomes more walkable, more livable generally. So super excited about it. I'm excited for this process to go forward next week on Monday. There are small things that I'd like to be changed, but I'm looking forward to doing that in the upcoming processes. Thinking about making sure that districts are simple, that we're not being duplicative. The Urban General 1 and 2, I think, could be collapsed together just for simplicity's sake, and allow the flexibility that's offered under both to just be offered as one district. I'm a little unclear about what the restricted district designation, the sub-district designation for the area going out to Bexley, what that really adds. I'm not sure why farmers markets, banks, pet services, other really desirable things shouldn't be allowed in buildings that are allowed to be 12, 16 stories high. So a couple things there. Alleyways, I'm not sure why we need 5 feet setbacks being added when that could be used for additional living space. In regards to parking, I share some concerns that were offered about by setting a 1-to-1 unit threshold. If developers are going to gravitate towards that rather than doing the other, and I want to say I'm very supportive of where we're headed. I'm just curious about some of those little technical things on where maybe some of those lines should be drawn. So just a little concern there, but super excited about where that's headed. I think it is very, very good. I'm very excited about where this proposal is going. Lastly, just as we look to future phases, I think the city attorney went and said, advised that maybe we can't go and zone up during this process past what's proposed when we're receiving feedback. So in these future phases, just kind of giving that heads up on the beforehand in case some residents feel like they would like buildings to maybe be of a more intense use, if you will, within their area. So thank you so much for giving the time for us to speak. I'm super excited for this, and I'm looking forward to continuing to engage. If you have any questions, always happy to chat.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Cape. Next speaker come for our council is Ms. Vicky Boggs. After Missy Boggs, we have Joyce Richardson.
Yes, I'm Vicky Boggs. I'm a 32-year resident of Clintonville, and this is my second time to come to a council meeting. At the first meeting that I attended, there was an architect from the city of Minneapolis named William Wells who testified at that meeting. I understand that Columbus is largely modeling Zone N after the city of Columbus, and Mr. Wells brought up several large problems that happened in Minneapolis following the same kinds of guidelines that Zone In is following. He said that building those major buildings along the major corridors in Minneapolis resulted in several negative problems. He stated that once the buildings were completed, there was a displacement of local owners to national owners, having been taking these things to Wall Street and sold, taking away the local owners and the hands of the city. Second, he said there arose great traffic problems due to the density of population in those corridors. He reported there was problems with emergency vehicles being able to respond properly and that much traffic was created. He also said that aesthetics were all off with tall buildings next to smaller ones. And my concern is that without more thought in this, I know you think that a couple of years of thought and 60 days of public comment was enough, but I think it's far from enough. I agree with the other woman from Clintonville that much more public comment needs to happen. I don't understand why this isn't being put to a vote. It would have allowed a lot more public awareness. And I urge you all to vote against this at this time and in this outline. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Boggs. Ms. Prosser, I want to ask you a follow-up. So we've heard this question, concern from a number of folks around sort of the ownership of sort of housing generally in Columbus. I think one of the stats I heard recently was talking about single-family housing right now, that 23% of single-family houses in Columbus are currently rentals, which I think would surprise a lot of folks when we talk about the different types of ownership that sort of exist right now. So there has been, I think, a key question, concern that's been raised, especially as you've seen institutional investors outside the community buy up housing. What is, that to me anyways, there's not like a zoning, there's not a thing we can put in zoning that fixes that. And I just wanted to, if you could speak to that issue broadly, that would be something that we've talked a lot about, sort of zoning adjacent issues. How do we encourage sort of local development, local ownership, home ownership individually? But there's not, I don't have a magic wand within this zoning code in which we could say only people in Columbus, Ohio can own an apartment building here, right?
Correct. Thank you, President Pro Tem Dorans. As we think about the introduction of kind of investor buyers into the Central Ohio market, that's relatively new for us, and it really coincides with the scarcity. As we continue to see scarce housing, more demand, we start to see those prices escalate, and we become very attractive in that investment market space. As we add supply and the impact that Zone In will have, it will alleviate that pressure and make, when we look at Minneapolis, they added 10% in their population growth rate, but 12% in their housing production rate, and it's in the same amount of time. And in that time, they saw just a 1% rate of growth on their rent. So where they really slowed that escalation of housing prices becomes a less attractive market for those investors. There are other initiatives that certainly council is looking into. I think as we think about our partnerships at the state and federal level around property ownership, I think we can start to have some of those conversations. There is not a mechanism in zoning that determines who owns a property or a transaction for sale. But again, as we continue to slow that rent and home price growth, we become a less attractive market for those investors, in addition to advocacy through our state and federal partners and allowing us to have some tools, and certainly the innovative work of council and thinking about how we can at least keep track of some of those partners that are now entering our community. But I think that scarcity is where we're seeing that escalation of those investors being attracted to our market where they haven't been in the past. Zone In will be really helpful in adding that supply and really right-sizing that supply and demand so that we have less of that interest from those outside investors.
Great. And just to summarize it plain as possible, when we talk about how things are incentivized or disincentivized, you're saying that one of the reasons you would see, whether in Columbus or any other place, is that when you don't build enough housing, the existing housing becomes more expensive, right? And that becomes more attractive to somebody to buy because they know they can then raise those prices because there's not enough supply in the marketplace. We've seen this happen a number of times here recently where we've had sort of legacy naturally occurring affordability within some legacy multifamily where we've had out-of-state folks buy it and say everyone's got to move. and probably going to throw some cheap paint and some appliances and all of a sudden jack up the rent, right? So when we talk about wanting to prevent some of those kinds of things from happening in Columbus, you're saying that one of the best ways to do that is just to encourage more housing development generally.
Correct. I think when there's the ability to make a lot of money on our existing housing stock, those actors will show up. When we, 10 years ago, when we had enough housing compared to the population that we had in our community, we didn't see those actors. They were present in other cities where you had that extreme scarcity. As we continue to grow in population but not keep pace with the housing, we get more and more attractive to those folks. And it allows for that exploitation, things we've seen in our community in the last couple of years where we have those folks coming from outside our community, buying those, what had been naturally occurring affordability in our community, and really using them as a way to exploit tenants and really charge a lot more than what the tenants are getting in terms of condition and the work that we've had to do to work with those owners and with the tenants and figure out how to deal with those outcomes. If we have enough housing, those actors are just not as interested in being in our community. So I think there's a lot of different tools we need to deploy as we continue to grow, but having enough housing really dissuades that actor from coming into our community.
Thank you. We do have one last speaker slip. Jace Richardson. I am not. Yes. Yeah, welcome to council. Welcome to council.
Thank you very much. My name is Joyce. My last name is Richardson, and I live on the further east side of Columbus, Ohio. And I have a situation that I want to propose to you guys. I think it is very well needed. In my neighborhood where I reside, I live at the Courtyard Apartments, which are owned by CHN, which is Columbus Housing Network, and which is very nice place to live. It's a nice apartment complex, but I'm concerned about my community, about the way that my neighborhood is adjusting. I'm a busser. I drive as well, but I'm really a busser. I ride COTA majority of the time. So, so starting from Ohio all the way through till you get to college, the edge lines of the streets are it's a disaster. Being on a bus and the bus trying to make its quotas on time and get everybody in the morning to the afternoon and back where we have to go, that's not working for us with those streets being that way. And we're hitting curb lines to the point that the whole back of the bus is dropping to the ground. And it's like, we have to maneuver, we have to commute, and then I think the biggest concern that I have is living in the neighborhood near Hamilton Road. That is like the worst intersection for accidents. It is so deadly right there. And that bothers me because I want to see the kids this summer is going to be over soon. So when they walk down the street, the big kids come from school and they get the little kids as far as they can get them, and then everybody split and go their ways. They do this. I've been living there for 8 years at that location, and it's been that way. I'm trying to get some street signs. I think we really just, so they can push the button, walk across the street so they can feel safe, and we should have to die in threes to meet that combat. And then I would love for us to have a roundabout. 2 roundabouts, one at Burlington, one at Hamilton. But my question is, how do we propose that? How do my proposal become an actual action? Because this is every day. I've taken pictures of the street, and I've taken pictures of how everyone is maneuvering. That traffic is going way too fast. There's houses on that street. There's business everywhere. We cannot commute like that. And I'm to the point where I'm like, okay, click it or ticket. But most people, they're going to do what they want to do. Everybody's not going to follow the rules. Everybody's not going to do as planned as we want them to be. But I just believe this proposal is well needed. And I'll just keep going over it in my head. I did a petition through probably about 20 people I got on the list. I walked through the neighborhood. I had everybody sign. I said, anybody that wants to sign, please sign. I knocked on the door. I adjusted to let them know if you don't want to be a part of it, you don't have to. I'm an advocate for my community. My name is Joyce, and I would love to see this proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Richardson. I appreciate you being here. So one, I want to connect you with Councilmember Brosa de Padilla. She chairs our Transportation Committee. So many of the things you're talking about, one, we want to make sure that either if the city is not aware of them, that they are, and then we can start talking with you and other folks in the neighborhood about how to take things from ideas to more concrete plans. So I don't know, Councilmember, if you have anything you want to add.
And put this in adjustment, right?
So if, Mr. McCain, do you have Ms. Richardson? Perfect. So we have your contact information. I have my office reach out. We have a number of roadway projects in process or about to be in process along the corridors that you just mentioned. So I would love to be able to share those with you. And then specific problematic intersections or other challenges that you may have, if you want to put those on our radar, then we can follow up with the Department of Public Service. We can share what's coming, and then what can be done about, certain projects that may not fall in line or be in the queue right now, if there is something that we can do and we can address.
It may take its time, and that's okay. We just want to see something happen in there. I watched three different accidents. I watched this guy he was this far away from the pole. Yeah. If that pole goes this way, that's my building. This whole street is going to be cut off, and there's other cars just coming and going. And then, if the pole goes this way, there's all of these houses on this side. Yeah. So we want to be coming down this street, but and maybe we're just going too fast. If I could just slow us down and get our kids to feel safe when we're coming and going from school and work, and and then the bicyclers, they're like, hey, we're gonna get hit, and people are not paying attention. Everyone's on their phones. That's another
absolutely. Yeah, we can have more conversation, because like I said, there's some projects coming, and there's a shared use path along by Hamilton Road. There's some others. There's some road dieting that we're doing on major corridors, so we can share those and talk some more. But thank you so much for coming down this evening. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Richardson. Ms. Richardson was our last public speaker here tonight, so one, I want to thank every member of the public that joined us here in person or those that tuned in virtually. There's lots of strong opinions on this topic. We have been trying at council to be as transparent with folks as possible. I invite folks, again, if you have more questions, concerns, you can email us. There is a Zone In temporary email address that is up. That's columbuszonein@gmail.com. As I mentioned earlier, my temporary email is cppt.robdorans@gmail.com as well. There's, again, materials from tonight's hearing available at the door. They'll also be shared electronically by my office as well. We, again, as we've talked about a number of times over the past several months and really years, we know we have to do something different as it relates to our land use policy here in Columbus. This Zone-In initiative was our goal to bring something forward that supported a number of issues to put guardrails around development in our community, but also bring about the needed housing that we know we need for a growing city. Right now, as it stands, these ordinances are on for a second reading and a vote at Columbus City Council next Monday. Those ordinances are 2110-2024, 2111-2024, 2112-2024, 2113-2024, 2114-2024, and 2115-2024. If folks would like copies of that legislation, you're welcome to reach out to my office. Just so folks know, the last city council meeting prior to break is typically a long one, and this one will probably be a long one as well. So we are actually moving our normal orders to where these pieces of legislation will actually be some of the first things that we take up that night. So the council meeting starts at 5, and we're planning to hear these pieces of legislation early in that council meeting. Do my colleagues have any questions or comments before I adjourn us? Again, I want to thank my council colleagues for being here, their input and engagement. This proposal also looks different because of their engagement. This proposal also is different because of the public comments that we've received and have been reviewed in the changes that have been made here tonight. So with that, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you.